Welcome to Attic Static. Today we have two stories for you, the geometry of the 7th level and the dial tone of the doppelganger. Sit down, relax, and enjoy. The geometry of the 7th level. I have spent 3 years trying to convince myself that I was merely exhausted. It is a convenient lie, isn't it? It's much easier to blame sleep deprivation than to admit that for 24 minutes last Tuesday, I walked through a space that mathematically shouldn't exist. It started at 11:42 p.m. I had finished a late shift at the library and pulled my sedan into the underground parking garage of the old downtown complex. It was one of those brutalist structures, heavy concrete beams, dim fluorescent lights, and that specific smell of damp dust and burnt rubber. I drove in, looking for a spot near the elevator. I remember the rhythm. Level 1, parking, level 2, storage, level 3, maintenance. The concrete walls were gray, streaked with water stains. I turned my headlights on, scanning for a gap. Then I saw it. A sign hanging from the ceiling beam. Level 4. I blinked. My brain registered the number, but my eyes felt confused. Usually, level 3 was the basement before the ground floor. But as I drove toward that sign, the air suddenly changed. It became colder, and the hum of the overhead lights shifted from a steady buzz to a low, vibrating thrum that I could feel in my teeth. I pulled into a space. The car engine died, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, the shadows began to stretch. Not away from the light, but toward it, as if the darkness were hungry. I stepped out of the car. The floor wasn't just concrete anymore. It felt slightly soft, like walking on heavy velvet stretched over stone. I looked around and realized something was wrong. There were no other cars. No pillars. Just a vast, perfectly smooth expanse of gray. I took 10 steps forward. Then I turned back to look at my car. My heart skipped. My sedan was still there, but it wasn't just there. It looked like it was being viewed through a slightly distorted lens. The headlights weren't pointing straight ahead. They were curving inward toward the center of the hood. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was the ceiling. When I had entered, there were pillars every 10 feet. Now, the pillars were gone. Instead, there were rows of hanging white ribbons, hundreds of them, swaying in a wind that didn't exist on the ground floor. I took another step. The ground beneath my feet hummed. Then came the sound. It wasn't a footstep, but a ripple, like a stone dropped into a still pond. Flip, I froze. From the far end of the garage, something moved. It wasn't a ghost or a monster in the traditional sense. It was a shape. A tall, spindly silhouette that looked like a human made of charcoal sketches. It didn't walk. It drifted, its limbs elongating and contracting as it moved. It stopped halfway between us. It had no face, only a series of vertical slits along the side of its head. It tilted its body toward me, and I heard a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "You are in the in-between," a voice whispered. It wasn't in my ears, it was inside my skull. I gasped. The garage around me began to fold. The walls didn't just move, they bent like origami. The floor tilted at a 45-degree angle, yet I stayed upright as if gravity had rewritten its rules. The white ribbons above started to glow with a faint, pearlescent light. I felt a surge of panic. This wasn't my garage. This was the level 4 that exists between the world we see and the world we dream. It is a pocket of reality where geometry takes a holiday. The charcoal figure moved closer. Its limbs stretched out until it was nearly touching me. I could see its texture. It wasn't solid, but made of thousands of tiny, moving lines. It reached out a long, spindly finger and touched my shoulder. The moment it did, the color drained from my skin, turning me as gray as the concrete. For a second, I felt myself becoming part of the garage, my breath becoming the wind, my heartbeat becoming the hum of the lights. Then the folding stopped. The ribbons snapped upward and vanished. The charcoal figure blinked its non-existent eyes and dissolved into a cloud of soot. With a violent whoosh, the world slammed back into place. I was standing next to my car. The lights were buzzing again. The pillars were back. The smell of burnt rubber returned. I looked up at the sign hanging from the beam. It didn't say level 4. It said level 3. But when I touched the concrete wall next to me, it felt slightly soft, just like velvet. My car was still there, but the headlights were now perfectly straight. I scrambled into the driver's seat, my hands shaking. I didn't wait to find a perfect spot. I shifted into reverse and backed out with frantic speed. As I drove toward the exit, I looked in the rearview mirror. For just one heartbeat, the charcoal figure appeared in the back seat, its head tilting one last time before it vanished entirely. I reached my house, sat on my sofa, and stared at the wall for an hour. I realized then that I wasn't imagining things. The garage was there. It was real. But for 24 minutes, I had stepped into a fold in the fabric of the world, a place where level 4 lives when we aren't looking. And now, every time I close my eyes, I can still feel that velvet floor beneath my feet. And now, our next story. The dial tone of the doppelganger. I am writing this because I can no longer carry the secret of what happened at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, in that fluorescent-lit sanctuary of soap and spinning cotton. Most people think silence is the absence of sound, but for me, silence became the loudest thing in the world. I need to confess why I haven't looked at my phone or anyone's face since that night. It started as a mundane errand. The rain was tapping against the glass like nervous fingernails, and I needed to wash my heavy winter coats. I chose Spin and Cycle, a 24-hour laundromat on the edge of town. It was nearly empty at 3 a.m. The air smelled of lavender detergent and damp concrete. There were only 3 other people there, an old man dozing in a plastic chair, a woman staring blankly at a dryer, and me. I sat on a hard wooden bench, watching my laundry tumble. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a text from home. Instead, the screen showed an incoming call. It was from me. I blinked. My own number was glowing on the display. Incoming call, my name, ... I chuckled, thinking it was a glitch in the network or perhaps a clever automated reminder I'd forgotten to delete. But when I answered, there was no voice. Just the sound of heavy, rhythmic breathing. It wasn't a human breath, it was wet and slightly labored, like someone trying to breathe through a mouthful of water. I hung up confused. Then, 30 seconds later, it happened again. Buzz, my own number. I answered. This time, there was a distinct sound, the metallic clink of something hitting a floor. It sounded like a coin falling on tile. My heart rate spiked. The old man in the chair shifted slightly, his eyes fluttering open for a second before closing again. He didn't seem to notice anything unusual. Then came the third call. This one was different. There was no breathing, no clinking. It was a voice, my own voice, whispering a single word. Wait. It wasn't an echo. It was my exact pitch, my exact cadence. It felt as if I were speaking to myself from just a few inches away, yet when I turned my head, the seat next to me was empty. I began to feel a prickle of unease at the base of my neck. The laundromat felt colder. The hum of the dryers seemed to drop an octave, becoming a low, vibrating drone that vibrated in my teeth. Every minute, the calls became more frequent. Buzz, my number. I answered, a sharp inhale. Buzz, my number. I answered, the sound of fabric tearing. Buzz, my number. I answered, a sob that sounded hauntingly familiar. I started to realize that the me on the other end was moving through something. The sounds were becoming more complex, as if my double was walking through different rooms of a house, or perhaps different parts of this very laundromat. The woman staring at her dryer finally looked up. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, she looked terrified. She didn't know why, but she felt the weight of the atmosphere change. Then, the lights flickered once, twice, and died completely for 3 seconds before buzzing back to life. In those 3 seconds of darkness, I heard it, a heavy thud directly behind my head. When the light returned, the old man was gone. The woman was gone. Only I remained, sitting on the bench with my laundry still spinning in the machine in front of me. My phone vibrated again. This time, it didn't just buzz, it shook violently against my palm. I answered. No breathing. No clinking. Just a voice that sounded incredibly close, as if the speaker's lips were pressed against my own ear. It said, "Don't turn around." I froze. My muscles locked in place. The air felt heavy, saturated with the scent of ozone and wet wool. I could feel a presence standing directly behind me, a shadow that felt heavier than the shadows cast by the machines. Then, the phone rang one last time. It was a long, sustained ring. I realized then that me wasn't just calling from a distance, it was reaching out to merge. I gathered my courage and, despite the warning, I turned my head. Standing there was a figure. It was tall, draped in a shimmering, gray fabric that looked like wet laundry. Its face was mine. It had my eyes, my nose, my mouth, but its skin was slightly paler, and its hair fell over its brow in a way mine didn't. It wasn't a ghost, it was a physical double. It reached out a hand, my hand, and touched my cheek. Its skin was ice cold. Then, with a sudden, fluid motion, the figure leaned forward and pressed its forehead against mine. At that exact moment, the laundromat erupted in a burst of white light and the sound of 1,000 spinning machines at once. When the light faded, the room was silent again. The old man had returned to his chair, though he looked exhausted. The woman was back at her dryer. But I was different. My hair was slightly damp, and my skin felt tingled as if it had been dipped in cold water. I looked down at my phone. The call had ended. The screen showed the final duration, 00 to 01. The figure was gone. I realized then that it hadn't just called me, it had traded places with me. I am no longer the person who walked into that laundromat. I am the one who stayed behind in the other side, and the double is the one who is now walking home, wearing my skin like a well-fitted coat. The end. Subscribe for more horror stories, and make sure to like.